almost there.
You got it. You got time.
I'm falling apart, guys.
It's okay, you got it. He's like,
I almost made it through.
breathe deep.
Okay. Hey everyone, we're back to talk about these bikes one more time with the Value Bike Full Suspension Roundtable. So now that we've ridden all the bikes, we've talked about them, we've done some reviews, we're going to talk about how they stack up against each other, what we think of the parts, the value, and what we would take home if we were going to take one for our bike. Both of you guys have ridden a bunch of full suspensions this week. Palmer, if you were going to take one of these bikes home as your bike, which one would it be and why?
That's a tough one to answer. Like, my favorite bike here was the YT Izzo, but I don't know if it'd be the best bike on my trails back home. For that, I think it would be the Canyon Spectral 125.
Why is that?
Well, just because like where I live, it's a little bit steeper. It's kind of rowdy. Everything's really dry and bony and stuff. And I just feel like that bike has the more aggressive geometry that, you know, you'd be looking for a little bit steeper terrain.
Now, Kaz, you live in Bellingham, where it's also a little steeper, there's a little more traction. If you were going to have a Bellingham bike to take home with you, what would that be?
I think I'd go Izzo. Like, the Spectral would also be on that short list, but I think the Izzo just feels like kind of how I want a trail bike to feel. Feels light, quick pedaling. So that'd be kind of your just do-it-all bike without going crazy. But the Spectral feels close enough to almost an enduro bike that I'd rather be on an enduro bike. So yeah, for me and for my kind of riding style, like the Izzo would be my uphill bike, and then I would have another bike as my downhill bike. How about you? Which bike would you take home?
I think I'd have to go with the Izzo as well, just because it's so versatile, it climbs really well, and I think it'd be easy to get along with on pretty much any trails. I do have to say though that the Specialized is also really easy to get along with and does everything pretty well if you want just a little bit of a different feel. So also, speaking of the Specialized and some of these others, we've talked about how they come with really good frames, but some of the parts were hit or miss. What do you guys think? If someone's gonna get a bike and upgrade it over time, which frame is the most upgradable?
I think my three favorite frames, it's going to basically that Specialized, that stump jumper, super upgradable. You know, like we said, that's kind of a base model, but it's a frame that's worth hanging better, nicer parts as time goes on, as you break something or just want something a little lighter or high performance. That Spectral frame is super nice too. And then that Izzo. So like those are the three, those frames. Those frames are also found on higher end bikes and for reasons. They've got all the little features are taken care of. I think that the Featherweight and the process just they don't quite do it for me, where I wouldn't be inclined to just hang nicer parts off there.
I feel like that kind of separates the frames that have geometry dialed versus the frames that have the components more dialed. So the ones that have the geometry figured out have a little more longevity and you can upgrade them.
No, I think I kind of ditto all that stuff. For me, if I were to choose one to bring home, like just frame wise, not just sort of like all bike performance, it would probably be the Stumpy, because it's like really dialed geometry, and then I think you could have that bike for years and yeah, just like hang nicer parts on it.
Yeah, that bike just makes a lot of sense.
My name is Mike Levy, and I'm here of my own free will. Smile at camera. I would like to tell you about our Beta MTB membership. For just $24 a year, or 7 cents a day, you get access to all of our field test videos. In a reassuring tone, the field test videos will still drop daily on YouTube for free, but if you do want to support us, please consider subscribing. Please.
As for the components, we know some of the components were great, some were less great. What do you guys think? What were your favorites?
For me, standout components are the ones that work well for the price, I think. So like, you know, looking at the Spectral has the nicest build kit out of all of them. So it's got those Shimano SLX drivetrain, SLX brakes, and it's got 36, the performance level. So I think all that stuff worked great. And I think on the topic of suspension, that Fox stuff definitely outshone the RockShox stuff in this case. And it's worth noting there is a price difference. So the lower end bikes tended to have RockShox. It's the RockShox 35 or the Reba or the Judy, where when you go up that next little level, we're talking about kind of that 3,300 and above, then you start getting some of that Fox stuff comes in there. So that's the performance level Fox fork, and that just, it's kind of a night and day difference, I'd say.
Another thing that was cool to see was the DVO fork on that Featherweight. Like, that's a $1,000 fork on a $3,000 bike. So yeah, I mean, if you're looking for suspension performance, that it was cool to see. That's a good standout for me for sure.
Yeah, and I think that Featherweight would stand out as the bike with probably the best spec for the price. That bike is $3,000, but that's a GX drivetrain, that DBO fork like you mentioned, G2 brakes. It's everything that's like you wouldn't have to upgrade anything right away. And that price, it's pretty crazy they were able to even create a complete bike for that price. I mean, it's pretty tricky as we've seen with the lower end bikes. There have to be some sacrifices. So a lot of times those do come down to the brakes or the drivetrain. And so it's kind of a matter of, as a consumer, you have to look at it and see which drivetrain is going to work the best at that price point. So at the moment, I'd say that Shimano, they're killing it with their lower end or entry level drivetrains. Like that Dior drivetrain is definitely better than a SRAM, SX, or NX drivetrain. So if you have two bikes with those two at the same price point, I'm going to go Shimano. And those are kind of different comparisons. And then sometimes the brakes, you do end up with more no-name brakes or brakes called Alhango that we don't even know anything about the company. So there's different things just to know, to be aware of when you're looking at these bikes.
Now I know there were some trade-offs. You guys didn't like all the parts. What did you not like?
I think the biggest standout for me was the SX drivetrain on the stump jumper. It was just really like the responsiveness of the shifts was terrible. I mean, it was like you'd shift and it would just hesitate going up the cassette or down the cassette. Didn't matter which direction you're trying to shift. It would hesitate, it would be clunky, it would miss shifts. It was not dialed.
It's kind of hard to see a bike like that that has 90% of the bike pretty dialed and then see it held back by pretty basic parts like the shifting and also in the stump jumper's case, the suspension, or with Kona, the Alhanga brakes. So then getting into suspension, was there anything you didn't like that you noticed?
Yeah, so one thing that you lose as you go down in price with any suspension component really is the adjustments. You just don't have as many of them. So that's kind of why we were impressed to see that DVO fork on the Featherweight, because that does offer all the adjustments you'd find on a high-end fork. It is a high-end fork. But the other ones, those Fox forks, you just have a basic low-speed compression adjust and rebound, which that gets the job done. Yeah, so then when you go even lower in price, some of those more basic forks just have open or closed or just low-speed compression that doesn't make that big of a difference. So it's kind of a trade-off as you go into this. You just have to decide which fork you might want, and if you're going to upgrade it in the future, that is going to be a substantial cost. So ideally, you're getting the most bang for your buck, and that's kind of why we hope some of this is helpful to kind of help sort out those details.
Yeah, I mean, like suspension is a huge factor in the way that the bike handles and the way that like your confidence on it, and the lower end stuff. It's expensive to upgrade suspension, and like the RockShox 35 forks, they get the job done for like slower speeds and stuff like that. But like when you start going faster, you can tell that bushing play. It feels like your headset's loose. The damping just can't keep up with those bigger, faster, successive hits. So you really do like get a diminishing quality pretty quickly as you start becoming a little bit more skilled rider and stuff like that.
So earlier we talked a little bit about our favorites, what we take home. Now we're gonna get more specific. If someone's only gonna do rowdy riding, they live in a place where it's steep, it's rough, it's rocky, what bike should they pick?
I think that's got to be the Spectral. I mean, that has the geometry of an enduro bike. We've talked about it a bunch. The 64 degree head angle. It's pretty long, so it's your long slack bike with a short amount of travel, but it's pretty fun in the steep stuff. It lets you, it feels different than your just super plush enduro bike, but it has the same geometry as that. So it's a different ride experience, but I think riders that are aggressive and live near that kind of terrain, they'd have a good time.
Other end of the spectrum, if your home trails are really smooth, you don't have a lot of rocks, you mostly just have flow trails. Palmer, what bike do you think someone who lives in that kind of place should choose?
It's the Izzo for sure. Like that's the most XC leaning of all the full suspension bikes that we had here. And yeah, it's just quick and nimble and really fun. Like the acceleration is great. And at the price point, it's really hard to find a bike that feels that quick and fast. And it really is one of those bikes that it like begs you to, pedal harder and really try and really like, I was like trying harder on this bike on the climbs than the other ones because it like sort of gave me more of a reward for like pedaling into it more,
So now coming back to bikes that do have some shortcomings, there were a couple that didn't impress us entirely but could have been home runs. What bikes were those and what could have been changed, Gaz?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Kona Process 134 has got a lot of potential. I mean, we had some gripes about the seat tube angle, but overall its geometry is still pretty modern. But the brakes on it, they really did hold it back, or they didn't hold it back actually, because it was tough to slow down. So, I mean, that's it's one of those things we keep going back, but they're important. Brakes are probably one of the most important things on your bike, and when they don't allow you to grab them and stop quickly, they really affect the ride experience. So I think that Kona with a brake upgrade could be a good option.
Yeah, so most of your guys' favorites seem to be consumer direct bikes, which does say something about just how much bike they pack in for the money.
it seems to be clear that you do get more value out of, from a mail order bike just based on the fact that, you're cutting out the middleman, right?
Yeah, I think like the one potential downside that comes up with going consumer direct is if you do need service on the bike, it's not as easy. Most of those companies at this point have pretty good customer service where you can give warranty parts and that type of thing, but it's a lot more inconvenient than being able to roll down to your local bike shop. Like, Specialized, they're not consumer direct, but now you can get the bike shipped directly to your door. But then if something breaks, you could hopefully find a dealer and have them help you out with it. So if you're new to the sport, going consumer direct can be a great way to save money, but it's nice to know that you have a bike shop to help back you up. I mean, any decent bike shop should still be able to offer you service on these bikes. It's not gonna be the same level like warranty service and customer support.
All right, that wraps up our roundtable discussion for the full suspension bikes. Remember to stay tuned for more videos coming out from our 2022 Value Bike field test here in Tucson, Arizona.